Welcome to the Brilliant Humans podcast, where we celebrate extraordinary people. But here's the catch. No one is talking about themselves. Every guest is here to share the story of a brilliant human who shaped them, inspired them, or changed their life forever. They might be famous or completely unknown, alive or no longer with us. A teacher, a parent, a stranger, a leader, a friend. These are real stories, honestly told. Stories of kindness, creativity, courage and connection, because brilliance deserves to be shared. This is the Brilliant Humans podcast. Welcome to the show. On this episode of the Brilliant Humans podcast, I am very excited to welcome the multi-hyphenate Chip Means. Chip is an operations executive, Anglophile, writer, musician, carpenter, crafter, gardener and cook, as well as a devoted dad, son and brother. Writing under his real name, Richard, Chip was once cited on the podcast How Stuff Works on an episode about pirates. Today, Chip is here to talk about someone who has not only inspired him, but made him laugh throughout many different stages of his life, and he's never even met them. I can't wait to dig deeper and learn more, so welcome, Chip.
Thank you, John. Happy to be here.
How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's rainy here at home, but this is my favorite time of year.
And that pleases me. That makes me feel very at home.
It makes New England feel very England.
England,
yes,
yeah, which I appreciate. I have to, I'm talking about England and rain. I always think about pirates. I think about Bristol. I did a thing about Blackbeard, the pirate, for example. What on earth was this episode about pirates that you were mentioned on? What was that?
Yeah. So for a while, I worked for an academic publisher when I was earlier in my career, and they gave me all these assignments. I was basically a freelancer for them. And there were these different groups of articles that you could just kind of pick from. And I picked the pirate group, and I wrote, I don't even know how many articles about pirates. And it was just contract writing, kind of get it done, get it out. And it ends up in some academic journals or databases. And then years later, I was, commuting into work or something and listening to that How Stuff Works podcast, and the woman presenting this episode about Captain William Kidd and all of his exploits said, well, according to an article by Richard Means, and this is how dumb I am. My first thought was, wow, I thought she said Richard Means. That's crazy. And then I played it back and said, she did say Richard Means. I can't believe there's another guy named Richard Means that I wrote. And then I realized, like, wow, that's because she found my article. But the coincidence was remarkable. It was like a kind of a fall out of your chair thing to hear that on a podcast.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's amazing.
Funny. Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously you did apply to talk about William Kidd, but I said no to him being your brilliant human.
That's right.
We can't have pirates on here, but
right. Too much Barbary. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a bit problematic. But you have got a brilliant human, I think, and I actually don't know too much about this person, so I'm really excited to hear your take on them and why you think they're so brilliant. So let's jump into that. Who are they? What do they do? And tell us something memorable for you about your brilliant human.
Yeah. I chose Conan O'Brien. For those who don't know Conan O'Brien, he's a comedian, a television presenter, a podcast host, a writer. And I'd say in the last 50 years of American comedy and entertainment, he's kind of one of the big names. And, I was kind of laughing to myself thinking like, wow, that's I'm a white freckly guy from Massachusetts, and I'm like, I picked Conan O'Brien. It's like, that's kind of who he is. But for me, Conan, the reason I chose him is because I would say that he is more responsible for my sense of humor than anybody else. And it's, some of it has to do with how I first encountered him. But honestly, one of the things that has endeared him to me over time is I've realized how much depth there is to people who choose to do comedy for a living, people who treat humor as a lifestyle. It's usually because there's a lot underneath that. And as I've kind of learned more about him over my life, I've realized how much I can relate to that. I think that what to me is sort of most compelling is his humor tends to skew self-deprecating. I like that a lot. And people, especially people who are kind of, given some default advantages, I think, to kind of disadvantage yourself as a charming quality in people. But aside from being funny, aside from being self-deprecating, he's also been very open about his issues with things like anxiety and depression. And he's been very quick to honor the people who got him to where he is, and to talk about those people a lot, and to talk about the people that work for him and make them get some limelight and everything. And so those are all the reasons why I think he's an interesting guy. I can tell you how I kind of first experienced Conan, which maybe...
Yeah, and that was what I was... Yeah, I think that would be great. And firstly, I was going to say that he's someone that does transcend, I think, just his country, because there's lots of American writers in comedy that British people just don't hear of, or other people in other countries. But Conan O'Brien is one of those people that I feel like a lot of people know of. Maybe not the depth of his career, but I do know, when I've heard little mentions of him, he's very well respected by other writers and other comedians, and I feel like that alone makes him brilliant. But I mean, yeah, how did you first come into contact with him?
So I don't know that there's any like real meaning behind this, but humor is just a really important language for me personally. So when I was a kid, I was growing up in a really funny family, and my sister and I, there was like 4 or 5 shows that to me are just like, that was like my formative kind of first development of my sense of humor. And it was Monty Python. There was a show called In Living Color, which may not have, I don't know if that played in the UK.
Was Jim Carrey in that?
He was, yeah.
Yeah.
But also like the Wayans brothers and David Allen Greer, and I mean, like even like Jennifer Lopez, like there were a lot of cool careers kind of started from that show.
Well, I mean, you talk about
Jamie
massive
Foxx.
comedians. Let's rock out J-Lo.
Well, yeah, exactly. But, I'd say that those shows, and then the others for me were like The Simpsons, Saturday Night Live, and Late Night with Conan O'Brien. And I only kind of got hip to Late Night with Conan O'Brien because like a friend of mine had said something like, this is the guy who's taking over for Letterman. And I wasn't really like, I was like 10, and I was like, I don't really know what that even means. But I remember watching it with that friend. And then it was only later, and I realized how much I loved Conan's just weird offbeat humor and the kinds of bits that he would do on his show and his guests. Then I realized like these other major touchstones for me, Saturday Night Live and The Simpsons, that was his lineage. He wrote for those shows and wrote some of my favorite episodes and skits and things like that. And so, like, why would he in his early 30s get to take over for David Letterman, who's a massive icon in that, in that kind of art form? The answer was, I think that people were really like, this guy has serious talent. And what I also really admire about him just creatively is he tends not to, or he has tended not to in his career, get comfortable. He tends to say like, what else can we do? Or we already did that, or what's a new way to do this? Or, he does a travel show now. And, I think that the freshness factor of creative endeavors is underrated. I tend to like musicians that don't just make the same album 10 times in a row. I tend to like actors that, like Jim Carrey, like you mentioned, like he's done some beautiful dramatic work and some of his best work, So I've always admired that about Conan too.
So because I knew he wrote for The Simpsons. I didn't know he wrote for Saturday Night Live. Was he a stand-up comic? Is that how he got the Letterman gig, or did he come through the writing?
Yeah, that's a great... No, I don't think he ever really did. I don't know of him having ever done stand-up or honestly even sketch. I think he wrote for the Harvard Lampoon when he was at Harvard University. That's a publication that's sort of like a satirical publication that's a bit famous from that college. And he, I believe, had the distinction of being the president of the Lampoon twice, and maybe was like the only person to do it at that point or something. But he was so kind of ingrained in that world that there's a really cool story that he sometimes tells about John Candy, the brilliant Canadian comedian and actor, coming to Harvard University for some kind of a guest speaking opportunity or whatever. And Conan got to be the guy to take him around that day and show him around Boston. And Conan tells that story from the perspective of, I got to spend a day with this beautiful person that we've all, been sad to have lost for all these years. If you think of it from the Harvard University perspective, they trusted like 19-year-old Conan O'Brien to take this like living legend around for the day. So I think that Conan was just probably from an early age one of those people who was like, yeah, this guy's going to go pretty far if he wants to. So I think that one of the things that resonates with me most when I think about Conan, it's like I think about all of the times I laughed watching him with my sister or with my friends or with my wife. There's a period where we were living on the West Coast and we didn't really know anyone where we were. And we just every night watched Conan. It was like the one thing that we just spent time on every night. And this was in an era in the like early 2000s where he would do this thing with like this big lever that he'd pull. And it was every time he pulled the lever, they would play a clip from Walker, Texas Ranger, which is a Chuck Norris program. And it was all because they were part of the same holding company. So he had the rights to do it.
So thanks to the NBC Universal merger, I can now show a Walker, Texas Ranger clip anytime I want, whenever I want, just by pulling this Walker, Texas Ranger lever that I've had for a long time but couldn't use. I've had this lever for years, couldn't touch it, couldn't pay the money, but now we can, no, it doesn't cost us a thing. And anytime I pull this lever, we see our Walker, Texas Ranger clip whenever we want.
Let's run or kill. 1, 3. 1, 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
And we would just be falling off the couch. And but there was a book that came out later on about a whole controversy that happened with The Tonight Show, where he was supposed to take it over from Jay Leno. Jay Leno kind of retired and then kind of said, like, actually, I don't want to retire. And then NBC just had this mess. And Conan felt kind of caught up in the whole thing. I think it's called The War for Late Night. But what it really kind of showed me about Conan that I honestly didn't know until I was a much older adult reading this book was that you think that the person that you see as this titan of what he does, he's complete control of what he's doing at all times. And the reality is he was never sure of anything that he did. And so much so that there were points where there's a anecdote he tells about going and, talking to the executives at the show early on, and they tell him, you've got the lowest rated show on and your time slot right now, and we don't know if we're going to be able to keep you on, something like that. And his boss, I think it was Jeff Zucker, kind of like talked about how he came into his office and he could just see Conan's feet sticking out from under his desk, and Conan just needed to lie down. He was having a panic attack, basically. He needed to lie down and he needed to just sort of feel safe for a few minutes and get through that. And I wish I had read that years earlier, because it would have taught me two things. That first of all, that's a very common physiological response to stress and to the weight of people's expectations, which I hope that people who listen to this can relate to in whatever they do in life, that it's totally okay to feel that way, and to then also realize that I need help. I need therapy. I need some support here. So I had gone through that personally in the workplace in some very kind of specific and very, for me, pretty traumatizing examples of where I had to kind of like leave the building sort of thing, or find some space to be alone. And I think that people don't talk about that enough. And I love him for talking about that. It's easy for him to be like, seen as he made these interesting decisions creatively, or he made these really moral decisions when it comes to the paths of the other people that are working for him. But ultimately, I think his greatest gift, at least for me, has been that whatever it is that we latch onto about a celebrity, the thing I've latched onto him about is like, it's okay to be this person that so many people admire and be so good at what you do, objectively so good at what you do, and also be totally vulnerable and realize it's not easy to balance any of it, and you need that help sometimes. He's very open about therapy. I think that's great. I
love that.
Yeah.
I think it's easy because the late night talk show thing, it's not really a thing here in Britain. I'm not sure if it is in other countries, but in America, I can't really sort of overstate how big a deal that is, particularly if you're taking over someone like David Letterman. The pressure he must have been under.
Yeah.
Must have been huge.
It absolutely is. When you think of Conan doing late night after David Letterman, everything, Guide, which was a publication we had at the time, I don't know if it still exists, but they pay people to talk about how it was sucking and not working. And I think it's a good perspective for those of us who feel that pressure, that your little world, whatever it is, and the expectations people have of you, you can choose how hard you're going to be on yourself about that. And it's sometimes hard to make that conscious choice and to kind of have the tools to manage that. I tend to be very hard on myself about things. And not let myself off the hook for mistakes that I've made, that kind of stuff. But if you remind yourself that, well, TV Guide's not writing about how I suck and people aren't reading that on their couch tonight, it's helpful perspective. It's like, it's going to be okay, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I always think about imposter syndrome. I think if you don't have imposter syndrome, then there's probably something a bit wrong with you.
Yeah.
Actually, you can use that, probably like he did, you can use that to actually drive you and to keep your standards high.
Yeah.
But as long as but also it sounds like he had a lot of humility, which has come
Definitely.
up time and time again on these podcasts about the brilliant people. They're brilliant, but they're all really humble. And it sounds like he had that as well.
He does. And I think my favorite way that he expresses his humility is he does this sort of character of himself bragging about himself. You know, he'll do this sort of fake bravado as a self-deprecating thing, you know, casting himself as the expert in something that he clearly has no idea what it is, right? I understand why your guests are talking about humility, because it's actually the invitation for other people to interact with you on their terms. And that makes people feel safe, and that makes people have better relationships. I can't think of a better quality in a leader than humility, frankly.
Yeah. And I read that, I mean, you probably heard this quote. You've heard a lot of quotes and you've memorized them. You're very, very, you know, the fact that you've got doubts about yourself is ridiculous to me, because you're one of those brilliant people I've ever met. But there was the quote about humility is it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less.
I love that. Yeah.
And I think that's so true. I think you can be confident, but still be humble and think about other people.
Right.
And you mentioned it, that he used to thank you know, he knew that it took a team of people around. I mean, but he came through that. And again, that's a difference between US and UK television. UK television tends to have one, maybe two writers, but he came through a world where there's multiple writers, a head writer, and he had to kind of work with other people. Did he bring that into the late night with Conan O'Brien?
So, to my knowledge, his writing team at SNL, this is crazy, but his writing partner was Greg Daniels, who is known for he ran the American version of The Office. He also created The King of the Hill and a number of other like just great shows. And their boss, I believe, was Bob Odenkirk, who people may know as Better Call Saul. Those of you who know HBO from the 90s, he was Mr. Show, which was a crazy, incredible show. And they also worked with like Jack Handy, just these great people at SNL who have had these really cool careers. And so some of those people, I believe, came, and some of his interns in the early days of late night were like John Krasinski and Mindy Kaling, like, people who showed up on The Office and things like that later. So as far as bringing people along, it's very much my perception that these people who kind of, started on his show as supporting individuals or interns, kind of helped to get them where they were going. And one of the things I really loved when he went off the air from his late night show and, went to the Tonight Show was he made a point of saying on his last version of late night before he actually took over the Tonight Show for that weird brief period, he made a point of saying, everyone's coming with us. We're taking everybody. We're taking, all of the people who do the background work that you don't even see. And now he's got his podcast, and really the star of his podcast is Sonam Obsessian, who's his personal assistant, who he's now made into a celebrity. And she's so funny and so incredible. And I mean, that's a great reminder too, that like, if you just think of the role someone's playing and just think of them that way, you're missing everything about what they could be and could do. Maybe he learned this along the way. Maybe he just has a good read for that with his team. But my sense is that he's not just a interesting figure in the form of art that he does. He's also a really good business leader. It's a big enterprise that he operates, and he has a lot of employees, and he seems to take really good care of them. And I think that's really cool.
You're listening to the Brilliant Humans podcast, where, here's the catch, no one is talking about themselves, only the brilliant human who has changed their life. If you've got someone you'd like to celebrate, drop us a note at brillianthumanspodcast@gmail.com. Let's just go back. So how long did he do late night, and then he moved to Tonight Show? For people that aren't aware of that, can you explain again how long he was on his own show?
Sure. Late night started in I think 93, And there's an incredible clip of Radiohead being his first musical guest playing Creep, and no one knew what Radiohead was at the time, and it is so good. That was 93, I believe, and that was, Lorne Michaels was the producer of SNL, producer of Late Night, and he kind of chose him for that, and he did that. He did that up until, I want to say, about 2013 or so. I think it was about a solid 20 years on Late Night. And then there was this whole debacle with the takeover of The Tonight Show. So he did that for not even a full season, and they wanted to put it on at like they wanted to put it on at 11:30 p.m. or something like that. And so it was basically like, he would joke, like, say, like, it's not The Tonight Show anymore, it's The Tomorrow Show. And that's, I'm not going to do that. And that was all to kind of placate Jay Leno coming back. Yeah, he officially kind of, I think, went off the airwaves TV wise for his late night show 2016, 2018, around there somewhere. And then he started up his podcast, which again, it's like, he's kind of one of those people, there are those people who you kind of like say like, hey, like, you want to try some etching, you want to try some clay work or whatever, and they're just like weirdly good at it right away. Like, I kind of get a sense that that's him. And like his travel show that he's now hosting, he's an amazing travel host too. It's actually very reminiscent for me. This is for your UK crowd, Michael Palin's travel program. And I loved that so much because Michael Palin, of course, doesn't need to prove that he's funny. He doesn't need to prove that he's likable, but he really made it about the place, and he really made it about the cultures that he was experiencing and everything. And so it's like, there's that power of like, you don't, again, it's a humility thing, but it's like, I can just be the vessel. I can be the reason people came, but actually the thing I want you to see is this thing, which kind of what your show's about.
Yeah. And you mentioned the sort of sketch with the lever. That feels quite surreal to me, and that feels quite sort of Monty Python-esque.
Absolutely.
And again, I've never really thought of, don't take this the wrong way, but I've never really thought of Americans as getting that sort of humour. It's always been, for me, you see the sort of studio writing the joke, making it quite explicit. So surreal comedy to me, I don't naturally think of American audiences with that. So was that his style?
Yeah, it 100% is. I think that that's actually what attracted me to it more than anything, and like the things that I've always found most funny are a little more subversive and a little more, like weird non sequiturs like you get from Monty Python or that you get from Mr. Show, for example. With Conan, I think that his thing was taking risks and saying like, what can we do that we can get away with? This is like, this format is so kind of like tired and it's so earnest. Like, can we do anything to kind of play with that? Can we make it so that the host doesn't actually know what the rest of the people are doing here, and they're kind of, like inmates running the asylum kind of thing? Like, he's done a lot of material like that with his show. I think a lot of his reference points probably are British comedy. I think also there's the absurdity thing is Andy Kaufman is a reference point for practically all the comedians that I like, all the kinds of comedy that I like. And Andy Kaufman is probably the best example of, you came here expecting this, but we're going to do something completely unexpected with what this is. And there's a clip of Conan talking really admirably about Andy Kaufman's entire weird experiment he did where he became a professional wrestler for a while. Yeah. And the whole thing was sort of, you think that at first he's making fun of wrestling, but then he's so serious about it that you can't really tell, is he making fun of wrestling? And then you're like, okay, he must be making fun of himself. And it's only after you kind of really experience him doing the interviews about it and bringing other wrestlers. He brought Jerry Lawler in on some of the interviews. And then you realize, oh, he's making fun of me. And Conan's whole thing was like, he loves it because he's like, who is this for? Like, this has no audience. It's the sort of thing that no executive would latch onto. You can't sit down with people at Netflix and say, this is going to make a lot of money in this day and age, right? Which is how things happen now. They get funded because we've done 80 superhero movies. We know that the 81st one is going to make money. There really needs to be space in entertainment and in culture for people to just do things like that. Frankly, they're more memorable.
I totally agree. I went to the cinema or the movies recently, and I sat there and there was 6 trailers, and every single trailer was a remake, a sequel, a reboot. And I was like, where are the original ideas? And to your
point,
they don't
get funded anymore. Yeah.
They don't get funded. But I think we need people like Conan that are sort of championing that way of thinking. You and I have talked about Limmy before, you know, his
Yeah.
you know, that is some of the funniest stuff,
my
but it's
God.
just so off the wall. And Andy Kaufman, I mean, yeah, the vehicle for me to find out about Andy Kaufman was actually Jim Carrey's movie Man on the Moon, because Andy Kaufman was quite again, a sort of US institutional figure. But Man on the Moon really opened my, and when I started looking into it, and Tony Clifton and the whole wrestling
Yeah.
stuff,
Yep.
I became obsessed with that. And
And that's the thing, is like, you can really sink your teeth into something that's like nothing else you've ever seen or experienced before. I mean, Conan has featured a lot of comedians. You know, you asked him about him doing stand-up. Some of my favorite comics I kind of discovered through his show. Moses Storm is one. Nikki Glazer, who people probably know more of, but like, she used to perform on a show really early on. There's a guy from Maine whose name is Bob Marley, which is funny, but he was on Conan in the 90s, and he's really funny and very regional in his humor. He's kind of like you know, the kind of comedian that like you just wouldn't play in a large audience because people would be like, what is this guy's accents? You know, but regionally he kills. But like, Conan's like not worried about whether it's going to kill on a large audience. He's like, no, I'm going to put him on TV. I'm going to put Rob Delaney on TV too. And, you know, all of these, and Michael Longfellow's another one. He's had so many good stand-ups over the years. And I love that he uses the platform in that way to say, this show, it has an audience. And so if we want to bring young comics through and let them do literally anything they want, they can do it.
And do you know what? What you've just described there, you talk about another aspect for me about brilliant people. It's not being afraid of surrounding yourself with people that are better than you. There are so many people that would be so afraid of getting young comedians in, or in the business world, having people come in that might know more than you or might be better at what you do. But the brilliant people out there, they don't worry about that. I mean, I'm going to definitely look into, you know, more stuff about Conan. I think he's clearly, you know, whether it's you've watched, loads of people have watched The Simpsons, loads of people have probably watched Saturday Night Live. I'm definitely going to sort of seek out some more material from him. But just, you know, kind of wrapping this up, what do you think the biggest impact he's had on you, the way you think, the way you see the world?
It sounds a little cheesy, but the truth is that the biggest impact he's had is that whenever I make a joke with my friends or family that has a certain tone to it and a certain kind of word choice or cadence, or whatever, there's some of those things when they land, I kind of say to myself, that was Conan talking there. And that's such a gift though, you know. It's like, if, you know, anyone who's a musician, whoever they thought they wanted to be when they first picked up a guitar or something, there's a little bit of that stays in there, and you eventually get yourself in, but there's a little bit of stuff where it's like, that was that note from that other person, right? And I don't have that about anybody else, which is why I am so grateful for the sort of two halves of him that we've been talking about today. Have just really, you know, in a person, I've never had that to admire about a celebrity. There's certainly leaders in my community or in my history with my school or my family that I thought of submitting for this. But when I'm honest with myself and I think about Conan probably an unhealthy amount. I think about him probably every day because of those things.
He's like, I mean, there was a thing a little while ago where guys were getting asked, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
The Roman Empire.
Maybe we should ask you, how often do you think about
how often do I think about the Walker Texas Ranger lever?
Well, no, look, I mean, and I think it's important to have those people, and you do. It's brilliant that you say that, because I'm the same. Like, there's certain things I say, there's certain things, you know, the way I move or look, and I think I know who that's from, and it might be Jim Carrey, but it might also be my boss from 20 years ago, and I say a phrase, and I'm like, oh, hello, it's him.
Yeah.
So I think we are the compound impact of all the people that we've come into contact with,
which is exactly what. To the point about community, that's what it's all about, you know?
Yeah.
Gain empathy by being around other kinds of people, and you get things every time. You get something from them.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned him doing I didn't know he was doing a travel program, but for me, travel programs, that's a way to kind of show that we're all just humans. So coming to the end, we always ask this question, and if you were to meet Conan, if you bumped into him, what would you like to say to him as your brilliant human?
I think that I wouldn't know what to say to him, but I would want to ask him a question. The question I would want to ask him is, of all the people you could have written a letter to when you were a kid, why did you choose E.B. White, which he did? You know, if you don't know, E.B. White is a writer from Maine. He wrote Strunk White's Elements of Style. He was white in that. He wrote Charlotte's Web. I don't know if that means anything to you.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. Yeah, that was a school book that we did over here.
Yeah, okay. Conan wrote him a letter, and he wrote back. And, you know, when I was a kid, I wrote a letter to Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, and he wrote back.
Wow.
And, you know, I kind of like lost touch with why I did that, but I kind of wanted to be a cartoonist for a while when I was a kid, because I was a kid. But I just would love to hear, all I've ever heard of that story is that Conan wrote a letter to E.B. White. And I'd love to know why him of everybody. You know, you could have chosen anybody, but it wasn't Andy Kaufman. It wasn't David Letterman. It was E.B. White. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, look, wouldn't it be lovely if somehow this podcast ended up in Conan's ears and he heard that and he responded? Because
that would be cool. I mean, I suppose
cool.
I should have said thank you, sir, for blah, blah, but you know, I don't think he'd like that. So it's also not very Massachusetts of us, so I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Well, look, Chip, thank you so much. I love this conversation. I'm going to go straight away and check out the Liverpool. And the Chuck Norris thing. And it's been great and thank you for being open and transparent and just brilliant, because you are also a brilliant human.
Thank you. You too, John. Appreciate you so much for doing this. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brilliant Humans podcast. If you've got a brilliant human you'd like to celebrate, then email us at brillianthumanspodcast@gmail.com to find out how to share their story. Or if you've got someone you'd simply like to thank, why not tell them now? It might just make their day. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow, like, or leave us a comment. It really helps more people discover these brilliant stories. See you next time.